This is Tyler, your antisocial critic and the host of the AntiSocial Network, your number one source for anachronistic conversations online. Come join us each week to hear opinions from some of the best voices discussing entertainment, politics, religion, and modern life on the internet today, most of which you've never heard of, but I have. This week on AntiSocial Entertainment, we're joined once again by our good friend Ian Kirkpatrick, or Ian Kirkpattie. I don't know if I don't want to dox you, obviously, so.
I'll sign all of the covers of my books. Ian Kirkpatrick is fine. Thank you.
All right, good. I don't want to get you in trouble, especially with all of your, spicy opinions out there, So how's it going? I believe by the time this is up, your new book will be just released. And also, I believe this will be going up on Halloween. So
hey, yeah, BLEEDMORE BODYMORE. I like to call it an urban fantasy or a supernatural thriller. We've got, I don't know how well you can see it. There, I have my raven in the background.
Yeah, that's been all over Instagram. That's a cool taxidermy.
He is a legitimate raven from, pretty sure he came from Ukraine, actually.
I was going to say, where do you get a taxidermy nowadays?
It came from the Ukraine. I got it on Etsy. They have everything on Etsy.
Oh yeah, animal corpses. That's going to get through customs really easily. But I'm
getting really well. I got the animal corpse. I got the Jeffrey Dahmer action figure on the other side.
You would, but. So, the book came out today, right? As in Halloween?
Yeah, the book came out just today. The audiobook is technically currently going through finalization, but the audiobook, if you prefer audio listening, is on Chirp. I think it's on Kobo. If not, it's going to be on Kobo. But it's currently being distributed, and it'll be on Amazon and iTunes and Barnes & Noble and pretty much anywhere you get audiobooks as soon as it finishes clearing. The distribution network for that is pretty much, we've approved the quality content of this, and now we're sending it to the sellers, and it'll take the sellers 2 to 6 weeks on their own time to get it up there on the sales page.
All right. So what was your elevator pitch for your newest book? You told me a little bit about it, but obviously, what is your pitch to people when they ask you about it?
A Baltimore mechanic goes to the Baltimore body dumping ground to pick up the car of her friend's car at night and discovers a body in the corpse. A corpse in the trunk. While looking for her friend, she discovers a ghost town under the city. All right.
And this is your second book to date, I seem to recall. Because I've read Dead End Drive, but this is your second one, right?
Yes, this is the second published book.
Okay.
Technically, this is like the 7th book that I've written.
Don't we all just have a graveyard of unrealized projects when you work in it?
Those other ones are coming soon. They're all on a wall over there.
Well, the important thing is that they're going to happen. But in my case, I look back on my old creative endeavors and I just, I cringe. But that's the curse of being any sort of writer and artist is, you realize
you don't have to cringe.
Not well. I mean, I go back and read old film reviews, and I'm like, what was I on when I wrote this? This is bad. This is real bad. But it's also stuff that's years old that I was different state of mind trying to figure out how to write, and then after a certain point, you go back and read something, and it's like, how did I possibly write something like this? Like every once in a while, you find something that's like, this is way better than me. When was I this good? But
What's the most surprising thing you found in your archive of old writing?
Oh, that's a good question. Because last year I did a whole, not a full archive, but an archive of everything I thought was actually good. And I went back and discovered a lot of my old film reviews were actually I not better than what I was writing now, but I was writing it in a different style back then. So I'm like, this is like, if it wasn't me writing it, I would actually be impressed by the writing behind it. But then I was like, how did I write this? But then I go back and there are ones that just are absolutely awful. Like the one I absolutely hate now is my review of 12 Strong, which just ended up being 70% an article of me talking about war movies and then 30% me talking about this actual movie, which I'm like, okay, that's a bad review objectively when, when more of the time is talking about the context of the movie than the actual movie itself. Like this is very sloppy, Tyler. I can't believe your name's on this.
Isn't it the worst when you look at something old and you're like, oh, that's so much better than I do right now. Where did this guy go?
I mean, that doesn't happen that often, but when it does happen, you're like, where did this come from? But it is a weird experience when it happens, because usually you go back and you hate everything you write, and you don't. But you did. There is something gratifying in knowing you did it right. But I don't know. You don't know what you're. 90% of the time, I don't know what I'm doing. I just, I just pretend like I do on television. So
I think that's the secret of like 95% of writers.
I'm not an actual writer. I just play one on TV. I make it look good.
So you BS in person and in writing.
Yeah. What's the Rick and Morty meme? Yes.
I don't know. I've never watched Rick and Morty.
Oh, bless your heart. You are so. I was gonna say you're innocent, but that's probably the wrong word for it.
Yeah, no. We started this off by talking about a Jeffrey Dahmer action figure. Right before I got on with you, I was showing one of my friends my Jeffrey Dahmer folder on my computer. I don't think I'm that innocent.
I've met worse. I know guys that carry around like phones full of photos of like open fields covered in like dead bodies. So you're probably you're not quite there yet.
This is only going to get worse like next year when the Jeffrey Dahmer inspired book is coming out, because that's when I actually have to start talking about it.
But yeah, I don't know how much you want to get into your upcoming book as opposed to your current book, which is just out today. But how long have you been working on this new one?
This one, I don't know which side to put it on. It's so beautiful in person. It's really colorful.
Oh yeah, I like the shade.
It's beautiful. Oh, so I started working on that fall of last year. Either September or October was when I was working on the first draft, and I finished the first draft in January. I think it was at the end of January. And then I kind of just kept going through revisions and got it to readers. So I've been working on this specifically for just over a year. Okay.
I mean, how is that different from how long it took you to write your first book? Because I'm sure that I'm sure the first one's always going to be like the labor where you're still learning how to do it. But it seems like once you actually know how to do it, it becomes a little bit more process driven.
Yeah. So like I said, this is the sixth or seventh book that I've written now. I'm trying to probably the second that I've taken to completion, which includes the revisions. And I really only started figuring out my rhythm maybe 2 books ago. With Dead End Drive, it took me more than 10 years to write that one. And that's because I was learning how to put a book together, learning how to revise, totally finding my voice. Even though if I go back to what I was writing when I was 16, you'll see my ridiculousness all in that. One of my first attempts at a novel was clearly a Twilight knockoff. But it went so far, Twilight-inspired knockoff, because I was a teenager at the time that Twilight came out, so clearly I read Twilight. But I went so far with it that as I read it and I sent it to somebody else, they were like, this could be a satire on the genre. Like, it's not even bad, it's just a satire of the vampire genre.
Well, there you go. I mean, a lot of great ideas come when you're a teenager. I mean, a lot of the book ideas I've had are mutations and maturations of things I was like daydreaming about in high school. So there's certainly nothing wrong with like carrying a lot of those themes in, because that's a lot of the time that's where your passion comes from.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been Dead End Drive has been hanging out with me for a while. So that one took a long time, and even when I finished, it was my MFA project. So I had professors helping mentor me on how to put that together, and I even continued working on it after I graduated. In 2016, I put it away, worked on something else, came back to it in like 2017 and 2018 for different periods to try to refine it more, and only finished it in 2020 when I published it.
Okay.
And even then I did a couple extra line edits around the time the audiobook came out, because the voice actor, Kieran Regan, did such a great job that I was like, freaking A, you inspired some lines. You inspired a second book, son.
Oh, man. He is very good.
He just got his first job as the lead voice actor for an anime.
Shoot.
I'm so excited for him.
Wow. Are you guys like hitting off as friends outside of the work, or is it just kind of hiring
Yeah,
you
we
professionally?
yeah we talk on and off. Oh, I've got his Discord, so we talk on and off for sure.
There you go. He's very good, so I'm very glad that he's gonna start like hitting some professional success soon.
Yeah, I've been so excited. I was super lucky to get him. Dead End Drive was his first ever professional audiobook. The other ones he did were, I think he said they were for his friends, and he did those as favors. But that was the first one he did that went on to Amazon, and he was actually hired for like that. And the different voices that he did for that book, I was so lucky to have him. I don't think anybody else could have voiced that book with the way that he did it. And I'm so excited to see him getting exposure because he is so good.
Yeah, he's got a lot of opposability to him. He can do a lot of different kind of character voices and make it all convincing and feel cohesive.
And he's got a lot of charisma in his voice.
Oh yeah, you definitely feel that with the more energetic characters in your book.
Whenever I still listen to Angus, I'm like, oh, he sounds so fun to listen to.
So yeah, you said that you started the book this time last year, and then it basically just got developed. Well, what did the idea from this come from then?
So this started, I don't know if you've ever heard of the extreme haunts that exist that are basically legalized torture. One of them is the McCamey Manor. And the McCamey Manor, you like pay them in dog food, because that's what he accepts. And then you like sign all of these waivers, and he kind of makes you go through a hazing process. And then he'll take you to this haunted house where he will actually torture you for a couple of hours. But it's just called an extreme haunt because it's supposed to be like a haunted house, but they get physical. Yeah, if you look it up, it's really extreme. Anyway, this comes into play because they came up with a hazing process before the McCamey Manor because people were not prepared for what they were going to go through at the McCamey Manor. And it was called Catus Silvis, which means murder woods. And I saw the phrase Catus Silvis, and I don't know if you've got this kind of inspiration when you're doing nonfiction stuff or if you have fiction stuff you do, but I catch vibes from things and I go, oh, I know I'm going to write a story on that, or I like the way that sounds. So I saw and heard the word Catus Silvis and said, that's going to be a story. And so I just put the phrase Catus Silvis on my inspiration wall and just let it percolate. I thought it was going to be a ghost story. I thought a character was going to be named Catus Silvis. And then a couple months later, while I was mowing the lawn, Catus, and I also watch a bunch of Dan Bell on YouTube, and he's from Baltimore. So I've learned about the Murder Park and Old Town Mall from watching Dan Bell. And so I'm mowing the lawn, and Catus Silvis clicks, meaning Murder Woods, as Murder Park in Baltimore. And as soon as I hit Baltimore, then Joey came up and said, hey, this story's about me. I'm at Murder Park. That's what Catus Silvis is referring to. And it all kind of sprung board from there. So it all just came from the phrase Catus Silvis.
And obviously
and then getting to know the location.
So did you actually travel to Baltimore then, or what did you do?
No, I just I live vicariously through people that are in Baltimore and doing videos in Baltimore.
No, that's fair. I tend to be more of the write what you know type. So when most of my creative writing ideas are all like, they live in Chicago or they live in the suburbs of Chicago that are so far out that it's nothing but corn. There's not a lot of in between in my inspiration, just because it's where I'm from. But
I don't think I've ever really done anything from where I'm from. This book, obviously, Baltimore. The last book was in Louisiana, and I made up a place in Louisiana. The next book is in Ukraine, and then also visits DC. I did visit Washington, DC in 2017. And I have another one that's in Las Vegas. I'm going to put another one in Old Louisville. That's a future project. And then obviously Cain and Abel is in Wisconsin.
Well, that one's extremely location specific.
I mean, I do have him in Madison. I haven't decided if I want to put him in Madison or in Milwaukee because, I'm pretending that there is some distance between that character and Jeff because they're not exactly the same. But I don't think any of them are any places that I've really been. And I have a couple of sci-fis that are in places that don't exist. So,
has anyone from those places actually read any of your stuff and asked about that? Because I'm curious what they'd actually think of your your understanding of it.
I've had one review so far for Bodymore that said I'm from Baltimore, and this had the Baltimore vibes in it.
Wow, that's impressive.
So I was really excited for that. I don't know if Dead End Drive will ever get that necessarily because it's got a made up town. It's not in a real town.
I mean, it's also so location specific that it's. I don't recall how much of the flair was regional because the setting is so located in that one like house, and you have so many different characters coming from all over the place. So
yeah, the biggest thing for Dead End Drive is that it's in a Louisiana bayou, and that's kind of something that everybody can recognize with Louisiana.
We also just generally get that vibe that it's like, you know, off the beaten path, like no one's around. You go outside the house and it's either going to be just dirt or like wild animals are going to be running around. So you can kind of feel that in different places. So even if it's specifically the bayou, you can relate to that if you're from, you know, like we're in my situation where I'm from outside Chicago, because you drive around and you see old manors in the middle of the cornfield all the time. So, but I could definitely see something that's a little more, you know, feel specific being harder to write because, you know, you want to capture the tone of a place because which that can be challenging, especially in my case. I wouldn't want to write like a New York story or an LA story because the people that live there are so like dedicated to their identity and their lifestyle. Like, oh, I'm an LA person. I can't imagine living anywhere else. I'm like, I can.
There specifically, LA and New York are some of the most written about places in literature, and New York specifically has very passionate people that are from there. And if they see that you have written about New York, they will be like, how freaking dare you write about it like this? I remember reading When No One Was Watching by Alyssa Cole, and that is set in a made-up borough of New York. And if you look at the comments, a lot of them that say they're from New York are complaining that there was a neighborhood made up in New York because they're like, there are so many different diverse neighborhoods. You don't need to make it up. And why is this character traveling like this when they should travel like this? And it's more than just the bungalows. And like, they are very specific. And I don't think I'd ever write something in New York just because of that.
Yeah, I've thought about doing stories with major cities, and every time I go back, I will do Chicago because I know exactly what Chicago is like. I can tell you half the neighborhoods in it, and which ones are the ones that have like what the local flair is like in most of them. Like I could not tell you anything about like, you know, any other major city because I don't want to speak for it. Like I've been in Nashville for 2 weeks, and I don't think I have the regional flair down. Because I'm 1,000% a Yankee, and I'm sure they can smell that on me from a mile away. But also because, you know, there's so many different, you know, tenors and tones that you get from this place. Like, you go to downtown Nashville, you get the touristy areas, then you go outside of it, and then suddenly you're in, like, the boonies, 20 minutes outside of the city. So it's like, which Nashvillians am I speaking for? Am I speaking for the people that live in the, you know, Blue Dot Nashville, or the, you know, middle Tennessee Nashville? Which one am I talking about? Those are two very different things.
I will say I don't think that I could have done it in Baltimore if not for Dan Bell, because I'm pretty sure is from Baltimore, but it's been a while since I've seen a video where he was like, this is where I'm from. But he went to all of the main locations mentioned in Bodymore, which both the Lincoln Park and Fort Armistead and the Old Town Mall. He went to all of those, and those are all very iconic for the city. And then one of my coworkers is from Virginia, and he's familiar with Baltimore just from being in proximity in that area. And so we talked about some of the different cultures in that area. But I don't know, you just got a skater. And then when it comes to Old Louisville, I did go to Old Louisville earlier this year for a ghost tour, because I love ghost tours. And I picked up 2 books from there that are actually about the area and ghosts in the neighborhood. And I'm going to use those for research for the story that's set in Old Louisville. So that'll give me more of that local flair like you're talking about. That'll specifically capture the personality of the area that I'm looking for.
Yeah, I mean, there's really no way around just doing the research. You have to
Yep.
kind of you have to talk to people. You have to, you know, learn about the geography and what it's like. Uh,
And visiting doesn't do the same thing as capturing some of the local mythology and folklore.
yeah, you really have to get in touch with the people. Otherwise, because I mean, otherwise the city comes off as very hollow. Like I noticed that, in my travels in the last couple of years, when you drive through a city, if you just drive through it, it's a very empty experience because you don't get a sense of who's actually there, what it's like. Like I remember when I worked at my old job, I did a trip where I dropped off a package in St. Louis, but I drove back the same night I was there. So my experience in St. Louis was literally 10 minutes in downtown, and all I saw was like the buildings and the arch and the hotels, but I didn't actually go inside any of them or talk to anyone. I was literally just in and out, and there was no interaction at all. I take it back. I stopped at a Waffle House. That was literally it. That's all I could tell you about St. Louis.
And see, and then where I live right now, we've got a lake near downtown that is so full of specifically swans. You'll see black swans and white swans. And I saw, apparently it was a young swan because it had a gray neck but a white body. And you'll see pelicans and all sorts of stuff. But the swans are a symbol here because some years ago, some decades ago, I can't remember where the original swans came from, but the original swans then started dying off, and then the the British royal family donated a couple of their royal swans to where I live to repopulate the swan population, and the swan population just booms here. And it's a symbol of the city.
Wow, that's a really good local detail.
And you wouldn't know if you just drove through.
Yeah, exactly. So back to the book. So what were you saying the actual like plot and characters are coming from? Other than you talked a little bit the location, but
so with the way that I develop characters, they just I hear their voice and then their names sort of come along. It's all going to sound very crazy because it's all very intuitive.
But my schizophrenia voice tells me how to write books. It's very helpful.
Yeah, pretty much. They just go, here is the character voice. And so I was mowing the lawn, and then Joey just shows up, and Joey is the main character of this book. Her name is Josephine. It's the funniest thing for me whenever a review says Josephine Joey Bourgeois, because only her last name is Bourgeois. She lives in a trailer park, but her name is Bourgeois. That's part of the irony of her life. But she specifically in the book calls out like 3 or 4 people that call her Josephine and goes, "My name is Joey. Don't ever call me Josephine." And then sometimes it feels like reviewers are going out of their way to say Josephine. And the inner Joey is just like, only my dad calls me that. Don't call me that. but so like you get that that's part of like that intuitive impetus voice. And so I was mowing the lawn. Joey's voice comes forward and says, "I'm a mechanic living in Baltimore. I need to pick up this car from the park." And so then I just sat down and started writing from that. And the way that I typically write stories is I divide a story into 3 acts, like a 3-act structure, and I find the climax for the first act and I find the climax for the second act. I usually have no idea what the climax of the third act is going to be because it all depends on character decisions, and there's no way I can know what they're going to be like at the end of the book before I even start. So I knew that I wanted the first major changing point in Bodymore to be Joey gets to the ghost town, because there was going to be a ghost town. So now I had to get her from this park where she's picking up this car to the ghost town. I didn't know how that was going to happen. And then I knew the second part, I don't know if I should say any spoilers here, but I knew that the second major climax at the end of Act 2 was going to be Joey dies. And so then obviously you've got a whole third act to figure out what happens after that. And so then I had to get her from now she's in the ghost town to somehow she dies and find the items in between those and what drives her as a character. So the story is very character driven. And the other characters all came about by just writing through Joey's life. I didn't know that her boss was going to be named Donnie, which, in case you're wondering, you're probably not. He's named Donadine after the Marquise de Sade. It never comes up in the book, but I had this moment where they're just like, "What is Donnie short for?" Donadine. And then everyone's like, "Why did your mom name you Donadine?" And he goes, "I don't know. She was into French literature." They just don't have any connection to it. But it's just, I get that intuition of this is the character that's going to happen. One of the other characters, her coworker and her no strings attached guy friend, Jag, just showed up in chapter 2, and in the first draft of the book, he was just a coworker that maybe there could have been some connection with later on. But as I started going through the revisions, he started to show that he has more of an intimate relationship with her, and it developed from coworkers that could eventually flirt to, okay, they're clearly no strings attaching, and probably boyfriend, girlfriend without the title. And they just develop by putting the character in that moment and living in that moment. And then I follow it. It's more transcribing than dictating. That's all that I can say.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of what you have to do with storytelling, because especially if you want the themes to arise organically through these characters' decisions and stuff like that. So
yeah, one of the most surprising things that came through in the drafting, you find this out when she first goes to the ghost town underneath, is she runs into Karen, who goes across the river Styx. And so he's there with a soul, and he takes Joey because she's not dead, so he has to get her out of limbo. She doesn't belong there. And they're crossing the river Styx, and they say, don't fall in, you'll drown on regret. I didn't know what that meant. I was just living in that scene, and Joey was leaning over the water and trying to get back to shore because she thought she saw her friend. And they just go, don't do that, you'll drown on regret. I didn't know what that meant, and that eventually became one of the major climactic items that filled in that whole third act.
Okay, that's an interesting phrase, just drown of regret. What version of the afterlife are you working with in the novel then? If it's the River Styx, is that like the Greek version of the underworld, or what is that?
I mean, sort of, but it's also kind of a hybrid of just what I've made up. So when Joey goes there, she meets the spirit guide named Soul, appropriately named Soul, that greets her on the pavement. It looks like Old Town Mall, so it's a place that she's familiar with in Baltimore. And across the street is a little hotel called Lodgings, and then there's a bar, and everybody's just hanging out in Old Town Mall until Karen comes to take them across the river Styx. Also, in this underworld, next to Old Town Mall, you've also got the forest that is the murder park. It looks kind of like the murder park that's in Baltimore, but it's a dead version. Kind of think, if you're looking at a negative, this underworld limbo is sort of like a negative. And this whole dead city is called Cave Mortem, which means hollow death, because the souls that are there are just there running on empty. They have alcohol to drink, but it doesn't do anything. They don't feel anything. They're just waiting until they move on to judgment. And that's really what I'm working with. But then I just took Karen to make him the guy that drives across the river Styx. I don't know. I already had Karen as a character. And so it's just developed into using the river Styx because of Dead Run inside of the forest and mixing Baltimore with the mythology and combining it into something totally different.
Is the book supposed to be a horror novel specifically, or is it what is the, you said more like urban fantasy? I'm trying to remember what the whole
it's complicated. I started out calling it horror, and if you go to the reviews page, you'll see some people that say it is absolutely horror. You'll see other people that go, this is not horror. I've had a couple people that call it like Edgar Allan Poe style horror, so it's very atmospheric. But it all depends on your definition of horror. I've just had people saying, yes, it's horror, and no, it's not horror. And it's more character-driven than plot-driven because you're always following Joey's decisions over anything.
Yeah, your first novel was extremely character-driven. Like, you spent a lot of time with them and like hearing their inner thoughts and monologues. It was like the driving force of the entire book.
Mm-hmm. I think that's going to be what my curse is for like ever. So if you want like a straight plot, you're not going to get it. With this, you're going to get the character arc, and this is the first in a trilogy. So you're not going to get Joey's full arc in this book. You're kind of setting up her the chip on her shoulder, which as a skater, she's got issues with the police. I mean, it's also Baltimore, so she's got issues with the police. She's got a good-for-nothing father that's beat her for 15 years, so she's got issues with adult figures, and that's part of her eventual plot arc or character arc.
Okay. Have you outlined either of the sequels you want to write then, or?
Yeah, so I'm currently drafting. Well, I've drafted the first draft of the second book, so that I'm working on. I have a general idea of what I want for the third book, but I'm kind of in the same place where when I'm drafting a book, I don't know what the third act is totally going to be. I know what the beats are going to be for the first and second act. I know what the beats are for the first and the second book. I can't figure out what the ending of the third book is going to be until I get there. But the main focuses for these, in the first book, Joey has to find her missing friend. And so that's kind of the main focus. It's a big mystery on where is this guy, what happened to him. In the second book, she has found her friend, and that becomes more of a pull between her best friend and her now boyfriend, because he's made her define their relationship. And her best friend is kind of crumbling because he's already dead. And there's this whole ghost thing that's going on. There's ghosts. That's the big spoiler for the whole series. There's ghosts. And then in the third book,
I was gonna say the whole thing revolves around a murder forest and the afterlife, so it's not too surprising. So
I know, but when the first book is like find the missing friend, what happened to the friend, and then you spoil that the friend is already dead. But then the third book, there's a recurring character in the book named Detective Stone Grant, and that's the cop that she keeps interacting with. And he shows up in book 2, and he's gonna show up again in book 3. And I've got this idea of there's so much detail that I feel like I'm just throwing it at you, that it's not going to make sense if you don't know.
I'm trying to patch this all together in a way that feels holistic, but there's a lot to it. That's not saying there's anything wrong with the way you're describing it. I'm just saying I'm trying to make sure I follow everything as you're describing it. So.
And I'm trying to determine if I should just give all of the spoilers that I know, or if
let's save a little bit.
That's what I'm like. If I just tell you what the whole book 1 is, then it's like, why go read it? Well, one, because there's one thing that book has definitely been complimented for in every single way is that it is witty. All of the things that I got kicked for from the FWA awards, none of it was for not being witty. So that's in there.
So what's the FWA awards then? What's going on there?
That's the Florida Writers Association. This book was a semifinal in its category. And
how do you not? I'm like, I know you as a person. I'm surprised that you didn't get kicked out of that organization for one reason or another. But
I usually keep to myself. It's fine. I'm gonna wait to see what happens with the Jeffrey Dahmer book when I enter that, because that's gonna be fun to show people. I'm like, how much detail should I go? Every time I open that file and I start going through the chapters, I'm like, how much detail should I go into for these sexual relations? I feel like saying, before I hung Patrick up in the shower, I cut him open and fucked his intestines is kind of going far enough for most people.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, you always joke to me about, like, oh, like, there's so much spicy content in the books, and I'm like, a little bit. Like, there's the conversation scene in Dead End Drive where,
with
the
Doc and Alex.
Yeah, the two characters have the spicy conversation. But honestly, if you hadn't told me ahead of time that was spicy, I would have just assumed that was just very Tarantino-esque casual dialogue. Like, I would not have thought, oh, this is trying to be transgressive. It felt more natural than the way you sold it. So even the big climactic speech for one of the other books you told me about, like that, like it sounds edgy, but I'm like, in part of it maybe as a part, but within the whole, it doesn't feel that bad from what I can tell. So I'm like, yeah. I definitely heard of books that are much spicier than your taste. So
yeah, because I'm not trying to be spicy. Like I said, I just transcribe what these characters tell me to say. Which, that's the funniest thing with freaking Alex. Like, I'll have people take his words and go, this is what the writer clearly thinks about these people. I'm like, you're going to ascribe to me this character's opinions, but you're not ascribing to me this character's murders?
Well, hold on. We don't know you haven't murdered anyone for yet, so it's...
I can't say anything. I plead the fifth.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got her.
The freaking other funny thing, oh my gosh, there's a review that complains about Alex cutting Doc's hair and how that's racist. But he talks about everybody's hair in that book. Every single girl. He goes after Anna for her hair. He says how amazing Ellie's hair is. He talks about Agatha's hair. He talks about Astra's face and her hair.
Alex
because
is
he's a stylist. That's his job.
He is a catty gay guy who judges every single character in the book and is out for himself. This is his character.
But they ascribe that as racism because cutting Doc's hair is racist, but nobody else's. Okay. But anyway, I'm never trying to be spicy. I just write stuff, and then eventually I go, well, this could be spicy. I've had people say, this is spicy, and I didn't know it was freaking spicy. The first time I posted something...
That's going to be the great irony of your life. You're going to get canceled for something that you weren't trying to be spicy on, and then the actual spicy stuff is going to go unnoticed.
Yeah, probably. Honestly, probably. The first time I posted anything from Boom, which is the book about a Ukrainian YouTuber who makes bombs. So he goes to Washington, D.C. Right? Doesn't that premise itself sound spicy?
Oh my gosh.
And the FBI comes, and the FBI call themselves Bob Dylan and Tom Cruise, and then they bring him to America under the guise that he's going to become a movie star. But he's making bombs for the American complex, military complex. So they also try to use him to start a proxy war with Russia. But
there's a little spice there, but I could see how I can see that fitting together. So
yeah, I think it does. Anyway, so the first time he comes to America, he meets this chick with
the American government doing something bad. I'm shocked.
It's funny. He goes to a convention with all these military generals, and he thinks they're all cosplayers. I had one of my beta readers said he's kind of got the self-awareness of Mr. Bean. So I hope it's fun. So the first time I ever shared anything from this book on social media was a couple of months ago when I was working on it. And he meets this chick with blue hair. And she's kind of a conspiracy theorist. But she's like, I've lived in D.C. all of my life. My dad is basically Brian Stelter. And so she's pointing at everybody in DC and going, that's a Fed, that's a Fed. She calls them glowies because that's what you do when you're an internet person. You're like, that's a glowy, that's a glowy, that's a glowy. And so she unravels this whole conspiracy behind what happened to the Ukrainians. It's like, so the U.S. government freaking kidnapped you and tried to start a proxy war and all of this other stuff. And so she's like, but why would they do that? And she leans and she goes, fucking lizard brains. And I shared that whole conversation, and the first comment I get on it is, that's anti-Semitic, right?
The lizard people conspiracy is an anti-Semitic conspiracy?
Apparently, I didn't know. I was thinking more of, it's mentioned in Dan Simmons' Curie and Comfort. I don't know if you've ever read that. One of the best horror novels I've ever read. It's so good. Highly recommend. But one of the characters in there is a psychologist, and it goes through how the lizard brains are the less evolved people because they only operate on survival. You have humans went through different levels of evolution to evolve into empathy and caring, and the lizard brain is the least evolved of all of the brains, and it only cares about the self and power. And so I didn't know that it had anything to do with any of that. I was going with the psychology lizard brain.
This reminds me of when I watched Song at the South for the first time, and I had to have someone explain to me what the offensive part was. And it was like, oh, they use all these retrograde racist terms. And I'm like, I've literally never heard these racist terms before. This movie is making me more racist just by having you explain to me the racist part of it, and I wasn't understanding before I watched it.
You go,
friggin'
who is the Nazi here if you're the one that knows the dog whistles?
Exactly. I know everything about how they work and who they are. I'm like, who are these people and what? Good Lord.
Man, I don't think if you're going to try to defend the feds and making fun of the feds, you might be a fed.
Oh my gosh! I mean, I could bring up some very topical Fed stuff right now, but I probably shouldn't.
Oh my gosh, it's too funny. Freaking.
I don't want to say too much, but did you see what happened on Friday with the Lincoln Project?
No.
Oh my gosh! You need to look it up afterward, and we'll talk about this afterward. But it is the funniest Fed post I've ever seen in my life. Like, it is like 1000%. Like, even the mainstream media is like, okay, this is fake.
I'm thinking of backwards. So I finished writing most of Boom in summer of this year because that's what I worked on after BODYMORE. And the feds in there, the joke is they look so incompetent. They stand out. Obviously, glowies means they glow in the dark.
Yeah.
And so, like, these guys go to Russia or Ukraine. I'm channeling my inner Fed right now. The whole time they keep calling Jan Russian, and he's like, I'm Ukrainian. And everyone just keeps stepping on how he's Ukrainian, calling him Russian. But so they go to Ukraine, and they come to him, and they're wearing Hawaiian shirts and straw hats and Hugo Boss sunglasses. And they're like, it's the winter in Ukraine. And so it's like, where's your jacket? They're like, we're on vacation. It's like standard issue vacation wear for the feds. And so, like, they stand out. And then he gets to DC, and literally every Fed is wearing the same pair of Hugo Boss sunglasses, to the point that the conspiracy theorist girl was like, I'm pretty sure they hand those out at orientation because all of the Feds wear them. You see that homeless guy over there on the bench? Yeah, that's a Fed. He's got the sunglasses. There's like a congresswoman that walks by and drops him money, and Jan is like, how do you know that he's a Fed? That person just gave him money. And she's like, yeah, well, Congress people can't tell the difference between the homeless, the actually needy, and federal assistants, federal agents. But so they all stand out. And so she's pointing out all of these people in DC, the hot dog guy, the homeless guy, that pigeon over there is a Fed. They tell you that at the Spy Museum in DC, if you've ever been to the Spy Museum.
Oh my gosh.
And they always stand out. And then that picture from the Justice for January 6th came out with all of the Feds standing around. And I'm like, the meme in my book is real. Look at the Feds. I'm only sad my book couldn't come out sooner than next year because they're going to think I copied it. But I'm like, I called that. I wrote about that 4 months ago.
I predicted it.
I would say I predicted it because they're glowies for a reason.
You predicted it. You predicted it in the same way that the Babylon Bee predicts the future events. They just pick the most absurd thing, and then the most absurd thing happens because we live in, like, clown world, so...
I determined that's apparently why I write satire.
Well, that's the problem with satire, is it becomes reality in, a disturbingly short amount of time.
It's my version of Americanism. If you look at America, America is like, we do everything, and we do it bigger and better than everybody else. Dinners, biggest and best out of everybody else. Cows, biggest and best. Fairs, everywhere, every state, maybe for no reason. America is just like, we're going to do everything to the biggest, fullest, most hyperbolic sense of anything. And I realized that the satire and the way that I write is really taking those identities from those areas and exploding them, because that's kind of what America is. It's hyperbole of every situation.
Oh man, that's amazing.
We are the only country, I'm pretty sure, that has commercials for pharmaceuticals on television. That is bizarre. But we're going to do pharmacy bigger and better than the rest of you.
Yeah, that is weird when you think about it. Like, ask your doctor about Cialis. Oh my gosh! So we should probably wrap up on any more BODYMORE stuff. Is there anything we haven't talked about the book yet, or?
They're at the Raven, I guess. I did not mention the Raven, even though he's over there and he's on the cover.
Okay, I mean, you brought up that you have a raven, but you didn't bring up the actual raven in the book, so...
Yeah, there is a raven. So, like you mentioned before, where does the mythology and stuff come from for this book? And I mentioned the two coming together. One of the other mythologies that I've come up with for this book is the raven. And it comes from just this phrase, the reaper comes before the raven. And I was trying to figure out what that means. And that, in this book, means that the ravens are paired with the reapers to find the dead so that they can deliver their souls to the underground. And the ravens smell dying souls dying hearts, sorry. So when the ravens smell a dying heart, they start gathering around the person that they think is going to die soon because they smell like they're going to die. And once that person dies, the raven eats the heart and the reaper takes the soul. So the main raven that shows up in this book, his name is Val because he's a Volraven. And Volraven is a Danish folklore where the raven ate the heart of a valiant king and gained a human body. And so the raven is actually a shifter, and it's kind of a familiar if you're used to D&D language. He's a familiar for the reaper.
Okay.
For finding hearts. So there's that in there.
And that plays that plays into the plot that's significantly then?
I mean, the Reaper and the Raven play a significant portion, and then at the end of the book, Joey doesn't have a heart.
Oh, go figure.
And the main tagline on this is horror is what happens when evil overtakes the heart. And when you drown on the river of regret, it swallows you whole and you don't have a heart anymore because you're already dead. So there's like this whole play on the corruption of the heart and the corruption of the soul and the way that regret and resentment fuel violence, not only to yourself, but to your family, intergenerationally, to your community, and it continues to pass on.
Okay. I guess to wrap up, let's get all the plugs out there. Where can people find this right now? They want it. They absolutely have to have it.
You want it. You need it. I know that you need it.
Buy my book. Buy my book.
It's so good. It's so witty. I didn't say that. But many others have. You can get it at any book retailer of your choosing. The paperback and the ebook are currently available. And the audiobook, if that's your preference, will be coming out soon. You can also request it at your libraries if you don't want to buy it. Just walk. Your libraries will pay me, though. But if you go to your library and say, hey, I would like to get this book, follow their instructions, they should be able to get it for you. And right. I'll appreciate you for that.
All right, definitely go do that. I can't wait to see what the rest of the books look like when they come down the line. So.
And the title was Bleedmore Bodymore, in case that wasn't obvious. And then you can find me on all the social media as KirkPattieCake.
Yeah, you just got your Twitter back, or you just reactivated it, which you were free from it for a while. I don't know why you'd want to come back to hell, but you're more than welcome to suffer with us. So
I don't know. Sometimes I like the art community. I like the Japanese art community. There is some really bizarre drama that goes on in the art community. As somebody with a comic artist friend that kind of sees the art community doing its thing on Twitter, there are just some weird things that happen on Twitter.
Yeah, I mostly just stay around because I have too many friends online that I wouldn't connect with if I wasn't on Twitter constantly. So
I don't know. I don't entirely know what the point was for going back, but my artist friend is there. Kieran is over there. At least.
Go follow her.
You're over there. So that's at least 3 good people.
All right, cool. Go buy her book. Go follow her on social media. It's great talking to you again. So
have a good laugh. Thank you for having me, Tyler. I really appreciate it. Good talk.
Sure. Till the next book, I guess.
Yeah, with bombs and the feds.
Have a good night.
Good night.
The AntiSocial Network is a Groupthink Productions podcast. Editing, producing, and hosting are by Tyler Hummel, artwork by Crystal Cowley, and original music was composed by Melissa LaFira and the late Dan Smolla. Like, subscribe, and please let us know what you think about the show in the comments below if you'd like to see anyone interesting be a guest on the show. Thank you for listening.